The November rain drummed against the windows of the homeless shelter in East London as 24-year-old Charlotte Hayes ladled soup into bowls for the evening meal service. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and despite the designer clothes she wore being 2 years old and carefully maintained, she moved through the shelter with the confidence of someone who had found her purpose in service to others. Charlotte had been volunteering at St. Margaret's Shelter for 6 months, ever since her life had taken an unexpected turn. Once a promising art student at university, she had been forced to drop out when her father's investment firm collapsed, taking the family's fortune and her education fund with it. Rather than wallow in self-pity, Charlotte had thrown herself into volunteer work, finding meaning in helping people who were facing even greater challenges than her own. At the serving station beside her, 36-year-old James Mitchell ladled vegetables with the careful attention of someone who understood that dignity mattered as much as nutrition. As CEO of Mitchell Holdings, a renewable energy company worth over $200 million, James could have been anywhere in the world that Tuesday evening. Instead, he was spending his time in London volunteering at homeless shelters, something he had been doing quietly for 3 years. James had started volunteering during a particularly dark period after his divorce, when success felt hollow and he questioned whether his wealth had any real purpose. What he discovered in places like St. Margaret's was that genuine fulfillment came not from accumulating resources, but from using them to make a meaningful difference in others' lives. "Excuse me?" Charlotte said to James as they worked side by side. "Could you pass me more rolls from that basket?" "Of course," James replied, noting her crisp British accent and the natural warmth in her voice as she interacted with the shelter residents. Over the next 2 hours, James found himself impressed by Charlotte's approach to volunteer work. She treated every person with genuine respect, remembering names and asking thoughtful questions about their circumstances. More than that, she seemed to understand the complex factors that led to homelessness and approached each situation with empathy rather than judgment. "You're American," Charlotte observed during a brief lull in the dinner service. "Guilty as charged," James smiled. "New York originally. And you're clearly a local. Born and raised in Surrey, but living in London now." Charlotte paused, then added, "What brings an American businessman to volunteer at a homeless shelter in East London?" James looked surprised. "How did you know I was a businessman?" "Your watch, your shoes, the way you organize your workspace," Charlotte replied with a slight smile. "But more than that, you have the bearing of someone who's used to making decisions and solving problems." "Very observant." "I'm James Mitchell." "And you are?" "Charlotte Hayes. And I have to ask, why here? Surely there are plenty of volunteer opportunities in New York." James was quiet for a moment, ladling soup while he considered his answer. "Sometimes you need to step outside your normal environment to remember what really matters. I spend most of my time in boardrooms and conference calls, managing investments and strategic planning. This reminds me that business success is meaningless if it doesn't contribute to human well-being." Charlotte studied him with interest. Here was someone who could afford to be anywhere, doing anything, yet he chose to spend his evening serving meals to people most of society overlooked. "What about you?" James asked. "What brings someone your age to volunteer work? Most people in their 20s are focused on building careers and social lives." Charlotte's expression grew more serious. "I suppose I learned recently that circumstances can change very quickly, and that the difference between having security and needing help can be smaller than we think." As the evening progressed, James learned more about Charlotte's story. Her father's business failure had not only cost her family their financial security, but had also resulted in a scandal that made her father unemployable in the finance industry. Charlotte had left university to help support her parents while her father struggled with depression and her mother worked as a shop assistant to pay rent on their small flat. "I could have been bitter about losing my education and my plans for the future," Charlotte said as they cleaned up after the meal service. "But volunteering here has taught me that resilience and purpose aren't dependent on circumstances. Some of the strongest, most insightful people I've met have been residents of this shelter." James was struck by Charlotte's maturity and perspective, At 24, she had faced the kind of adversity that revealed character, and she had chosen to respond with service rather than self-pity. "Charlotte, I hope this doesn't sound presumptuous, but I'd like to ask you something." "What's that?" "Would you have coffee with me sometime?" "Not as a date," James added quickly, seeing her surprised expression, "but as someone who would like to continue our conversation about service and social responsibility." Charlotte considered this carefully. "Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate the invitation, but I should be honest about my situation. I'm not in a position to socialize in the circles you probably move in. Coffee for me means the cafe down the street, not expensive restaurants." "The cafe down the street sounds perfect," James replied. "And please call me James." Over the following weeks, James and Charlotte met regularly for coffee, their conversations ranging from philosophy to practical discussions about social policy and community development. James was impressed by Charlotte's intelligence and insight, while Charlotte found herself drawn to James's genuine commitment to using his resources responsibly. More than that, they discovered a shared sense of humor and genuine compatibility that transcended their different backgrounds. James had traveled the world, but had never met anyone who challenged his thinking the way Charlotte did. Charlotte had grown up with privilege, but had never encountered someone who wore wealth so lightly and used it so thoughtfully. "I have a confession," James said one afternoon as they walked along the Thames. "I've been thinking about expanding my company's operations to include a UK division focused on sustainable community development." "That sounds like an excellent business opportunity," Charlotte replied. "It is. But I've also been thinking that I'd like to stay in London longer than originally planned." Charlotte stopped walking and looked at him directly. "James, if you're considering changing your business plans because of our friendship, I need you to know that I can't be anyone's charity case or project." "You're not a charity case," James said firmly. "You're one of the most capable, insightful people I've ever met. If anything, I've been wondering if you'd consider working with me to develop the community outreach components of the London operation." "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a partnership. Your understanding of social issues combined with your education and natural leadership abilities would be invaluable in developing programs that actually help communities rather than just looking good in annual reports." 6 months later, Charlotte stood in the offices of Mitchell Holdings UK, reviewing plans for a comprehensive program that would provide not just emergency assistance but job training, mental health support, and pathways to permanent housing for people experiencing homelessness. James had been true to his word about partnership rather than charity. Charlotte's salary was based on her contributions to the company, and her ideas had shaped every aspect of their community development initiative. More importantly, their professional collaboration had evolved into a personal relationship built on mutual respect and shared values. "You know," Charlotte said one evening as they walked home from another volunteer shift at St. Margaret's, "6 months ago I thought my life was over because I had lost my university place and my family's security. And now?" James asked, taking her hand as they strolled through the quiet London streets. "Now I realize that sometimes losing what you thought you wanted makes room for discovering what you actually need." James stopped walking and turned to face her. "Charlotte, I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "I think I'm falling in love with you. Not because I want to rescue you or because I feel sorry for your circumstances, but because you've shown me what it means to find purpose in service to others." Charlotte felt tears spring to her eyes. "James, I've been afraid to admit this, but I think I've been falling in love with you too. Not because of what you can provide, but because of who you are when nobody's watching." A year later, they were married in a small ceremony at St. Margaret's Shelter, surrounded by volunteers, staff, and residents who had become like family to both of them. The wedding was simple but meaningful, reflecting their shared commitment to building a life centered on service rather than status. Charlotte had returned to university part-time, pursuing a degree in social work while continuing to develop innovative programs for Mitchell Holdings UK. James had discovered that his most profitable investments were the ones that strengthened communities and created sustainable opportunities for people who had been overlooked by traditional economic systems. Their London home became a gathering place for activists, social workers, and community leaders from around the world. But it was also a sanctuary where two people who had found each other through service continued to grow in love and purpose. The rain that had been falling the night they met had become a symbol of renewal rather than hardship, reminding them that sometimes the most beautiful relationships grow from the decision to show up for others when they need help most. Charlotte's father had eventually found work with a nonprofit organization, his experience with financial failure giving him unique insight into helping others navigate economic crisis. Her mother had become a passionate advocate for financial literacy education, turning their family's painful experience into a resource for helping others avoid similar pitfalls. James's company continued to expand internationally, but always with the understanding that profit without purpose was meaningless, and that the best measure of success was the positive impact they could have on communities around the world. Their love story had begun in a homeless shelter, not because either of them was looking for romance, but because they were both looking for ways to serve others. What they discovered was that the strongest relationships are built not on mutual need, but on shared purpose, and that love grows deepest when it's rooted in the choice to see and respond to the humanity in everyone we meet. If this story reminded you that the most meaningful connections often come from shared service to others, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need encouragement about finding purpose through helping others. Subscribe for more stories about how love grows strongest when it's built on mutual respect and shared values. And please comment below about a time when volunteer work or service to others led to meaningful relationships in your life, or when helping others helped you discover what really mattered to you. Your story might inspire someone else to find their purpose through service today.